Hello, I'm Sheena Gill with CognitiveCare. On this episode of Early Detect Studios, we feature Michael M.J. Jackson, Global Head of Industries at DocuSign. MJ currently leads global strategy across regulated industries at DocuSign. His entrepreneurial team commercializes solutions that address unique customer challenges in public sector, healthcare, life sciences, financial services, and other segments. Prior to joining DocuSign, MJ has a pretty impressive track record. He served as general manager at Amazon Web Services, where he established and scaled multiple mission critical businesses from inception, including public health, amongst other areas. He also served as general manager of Consumer Health at Intel Corporation, where he developed global lines of business for patient generated health data platforms, and as director of healthcare and public sector at Adobe Systems, where he led the commercialization of digital health solutions. MJ has launched biopharma and medical device products across a range of clinical research and therapeutic specialties, including oncology, neurology, and endocrinology. Is there anything this man hasn't done? And to top it all off, my good friend MJ is a U.S. Coast Guard veteran. It goes without saying, it is an absolute honor to have you here today, MJ. We're delighted to have you on Early Detect Studios.
Well, Sheena, you are a dear old friend, and I have been looking forward to this recording for some time now. I'm glad that we finally found new ways to collaborate.
Absolutely. So let's get right into the questions. 10 years ago, we may not have really thought of DocuSign as having a crucial role in healthcare. However, lots has changed. Tell us about DocuSign's role in healthcare and life sciences today. And we'd love to hear more about your vectors that you're leading at DocuSign.
Sure, sure. So I'll start with myself. I think you did a great job of summarizing my role. I lead an entrepreneurial team of industry strategists. We cover many of the high growth regulated industries. And specifically, we look to chart a course to accelerate the path of our customers' transformation in those areas. And as it relates to healthcare specifically, we are not a traditional healthcare company in that we do not directly contribute to the improvement of health outcomes, for example. What we do, however, is we accelerate our customers' ability to navigate the regulatory hurdles that often stand between them as clinicians or researchers or payers and the improved outcomes that they seek on behalf of their patients or members. And so that's really where our sweet spot is. It's accelerating the pace of the business of healthcare.
Absolutely. So please share with us DocuSign's broad healthcare strategy, the vision, the mission. And we'd also like to understand how DocuSign's strategy promotes a focus on advancing equitable healthcare, reducing disparities, making insights more meaningful and accessible, because I know that's very important to you.
Absolutely. So we, over the past few years, even before this very tragic global pandemic, have seen a number of trends that have indicated that as an industry, healthcare is becoming more consumerized. So, from patients to clinicians, administrators to even those in HR, expectations have been conditioned to expect opportunities to engage from anywhere. We call it the anywhere economy, right? So patients expect to be able to access their data or processes that are data driven from anywhere, from any device, regardless of the size of their screen or the speed of their connection. We really call it the anywhere economy. And so our goal is to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to access, contribute, and even thrive in this new anywhere economy. And so when you talk about opportunities to ensure equitable access, what we find is particularly in lower socioeconomic communities or those that have been marginalized, oftentimes individuals rely solely on their mobile device,
Exactly.
5 or 6 inches of glass
Right.
really standing between them and the organizations that they look to interact with. And so we make it a point to start with a philosophy that we refer to as mobile first. Every experience should be as immersive and intuitive, regardless of, like I said, the size of the screen. And so we want to start with that lowest common denominator and work out from there.
That makes sense. It is said that medical care may only really account for about 10 or 20% of healthcare outcomes. So that high quality care has to consider other elements that impact patient health, namely social determinants of health. These non clinical factors really do impact patient well being and directly correlate to outcomes, and at individual and population levels. However,
Mhm.
identifying patient social determinants of health data can be kind of challenging. The information isn't always easily accessible, especially when stakeholders in healthcare, they're trying to make decisions at rapid pace. They need to have information right away to make key decisions. Social determinants of health data might reside in an EHR, but in large part, it's trapped as unstructured data. So, given your role, what are your thoughts on this?
That's a great question. We typically look at transformation in three discrete steps. I mean, there are obviously a number of steps to be taken depending on where an organization is in its maturity at any given time. But to generalize a little bit, we could say that there are three discrete steps or milestones along what is normally a much longer journey. The first step is what we call e-health, or the digitization of forms or records or agreements. Gartner tells us that in healthcare and many other regulated industries, 85% of all business processes begin with some sort of a form, whether it's a patient onboarding or requesting benefits or time off. It's some sort of a form that initiates that process. And so if we can digitize the form and the processes that go into data entry into that form, automating and digitizing it, it makes it much more simple to aggregate and analyze at scale, right? And then the second step is often what we call open health or collaborative partnerships across multiple parties. And again, the business of care will involve accelerating the pace at which those partnerships can be formed and executed, but also creating role based access to a singular repository where all of these executed agreements may reside. And then finally, smart health is applying artificial intelligence or some sort of an analytics application so that you can draw insights out of that repository and make accurate predictive analysis against it.
Mhm.
Now, back to your original question, as it relates to social determinants, you're right. Oftentimes, that data exists and it's buried within mountains of paper.
Exactly.
And if it does exist digitally, it's often entered into some disconnected form as an open text field, as you said, unstructured data.
Exactly.
And so the way to really draw that value out so that a more accurately coordinated care plan can be formed is to take that into account and ensure that the data is digitized at its point of entry.
Exactly.
Um, Manual redundant data entry is minimized so that any data that exists in existing systems can automatically be extracted. So, for example, at DocuSign, we have connectors, upwards of 400 of them, that tie into backend systems, whether it's Google or ServiceNow, Microsoft, or Salesforce, so that we can automate the extraction and preparation of the agreements that are to be completed. And then the design of those agreements or forms or cases goes by a number of different monikers. The design of those forms should take into account the type of data that will be entered and where it should be routed so that it could adequately be factored into an overall care plan or contract or whatever it is, the use case that will be leveraging that input data.
That makes a tremendous amount of sense. So, you talked about AI, and here at Cognitive Care, that's so important to us. So, I want to ask you a question about that. When it comes to
Sure.
applying AI to healthcare, what do you like? Give me one trend that you feel is a step in the right direction that DocuSign, in particular, is bringing to the table.
That's a great question. So we hear a lot about value-based care,
Mhm.
right? Moving from fee for service to value-based care. Um, like I said, our real focus of adding value is in the agreement space. Healthcare is going through a number of disruptive trends right now, and so it requires an all hands on deck
Yep,
approach.
absolutely.
And so, in order to do that, it really is going to require partnerships public sector, private sector, between departments, between organizations, it's going to require what we call um, value based contracting to automate and accelerate the pace at which these partnerships can be formed and synergies can be leveraged. And so, one way that we can apply artificial intelligence in the contracting workflow is to accurately assess the risk of any given agreement before multiple parties sign, as well as managing obligations on the tail end. Um, Contracts typically are referred to in terms of its overall value. So, for example, you might say you and I come to terms on an agreement, and the value potential is $5 million. Well, that $5 million number is based on the assumption that all variables are ideal and all obligations will be met.
Right.
So let's say, for example, we accurately, or let's say we did not accurately assess the risk before signing, and some money was left on the table, right? Some value was not tangibly realized. So now we go from potential value to residual value,
Right.
right? And it's capturing what will likely occur throughout the term of the contract. Now, let's suppose on the tail end, after signing, obligations aren't monitored
Hmm.
and late fees aren't collected, or varying inputs are not identified to impact the outputs. Well, now the value drops from the residual to the actual realized value.
Right.
And what we often find is that that realized value could potentially be less than a third of the potential value
Wow.
if you're not able to accurately assess risks and take steps accordingly or manage obligations on the back end.
That's it's. I'm so happy you talked about value-based contracting because that's a particular area of interest at cognitive care. And the assessment of risk. It's so important to understand how all of these pieces, what you do at DocuSign, what the folks who are crunching the analysis within the AI, what they're doing, how it all fits together. And thank you for sharing that so beautifully. Could you potentially, share some more use cases that your healthcare customers, for example, may be able to benefit from as it relates to AI analytics and DocuSign?
Absolute, absolutely. So DocuSign is known as the world's leading e-signature solution. In fact, last year we celebrated 1 million customers, 1 billion users.
Congratulations.
But across, oh, thank you, thank you. Across the workflow, though, and I alluded to this, there's an opportunity to add value both before the signature is acquired by automating the processes to prepare the agreements that are about to be signed, as well as downstream of the signature, automating processes that are to be initiated automatically after the signature is acquired, or managing the repository of signed agreements. And so other use cases include helping our customers in the hospital space, for example, very similar to what Cognitive Care is doing with value-based contracting, helping customers to identify time to value, helping to minimize that time to value, whether it's related to supply chain or GPO agreements, data sharing agreements between multiple parties looking to coordinate care, or it could be as transactional as a patient onboarding process. But across healthcare and life sciences, when you think about clinical trial enrollment and ensuring equitable representation across disease states, there's such an opportunity to automate and accelerate the business processes, again, that stand between often the clinician and the desired outcomes that they aspire to generate on behalf of their patients.
Got it. Got it. So the last two questions I have for you are more broadly related to DocuSign's role in access and management of data. Uh, how is
Mhm.
DocuSign working to make accessing and managing healthcare data more seamless? And of course, following all applicable regulations, of course.
Another great question. So when you think about um, agreements and contracts, I mean, at the core of these multiple parties coming together to agree on a singular term or a number of terms at a single point in time, there are really two factors. There's trust, and there's what we call privacy and security. And they're really interdependent. So you have to trust that the other party is who they say they are, And you have to also trust in the process that the data will be secured, it will be encrypted, and it will only be accessible by the individuals who, based on their roles, justifiably deserve access. And so we take that element extremely seriously. And so from a contractual standpoint, we believe in accountability through transparency. Transparency could be as simple as something as simple as version control during the redlining process, or auditable logs that demonstrate who has accessed data from where and at what point throughout the entire workflow, so that trust can be generated, established, and maintained throughout the relationship that is ultimately being created among multiple parties in order to achieve these aspirational goals.
Sure. And lastly, how does DocuSign nurture and accelerate innovation amongst your partners?
Great question. The same way that we evangelize the significance of multiple parties coming together to accomplish these aspirational goals throughout the healthcare ecosystem, we really prioritize, we call it better together. We prioritize the partner ecosystem. And we work in a number of ways, really three main ways that we work with partners. First is what we call technology partners, or ISVs, independent software vendors, who look to integrate DocuSign's solutions into their own offerings. And so it's more of an embedded approach, and we go to market together to add incremental value to the offerings that they already have. The other model is what we call solutions integrators. Those are organizations that implement the more complex DocuSign offerings on behalf of DocuSign or in collaboration with DocuSign with our enterprise customers. They often build practices around the DocuSign Agreement Cloud in order to incrementally add value, for example, to customers who may know us only for e-signature, but have not really taken advantage of the full breadth and depth of what we have to offer. And then we have resellers and channel partners who often hold contractual vehicles and agreements with many of our customers in the private sector. And so that often removes friction as it relates to procurement and acquisitions processes. So we are building and managing a very large ecosystem because healthcare, as well as many other regulated industries, rely on agreements. They rely on multiple parties coming together to achieve things that they would not likely be able to do in a timely way individually.
That's true. And MJ, I'm so excited about where DocuSign is going because um, what this means in the future. And I know DocuSign is, sort of in the business workflows of healthcare, but what that means downstream, and in the future for folks who are working on NLP and other innovations, it's really going to help change the world of healthcare in great ways. So I think this is a great way to conclude the episode. Any last words that you would like to share?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. There are so many exciting innovations that are finding their way into mainstream. Just within the last year, we launched what we call DocuSign Ventures, which is a subset of our organization that seeks to identify and really do business with innovative startups and early stage companies that are innovating in the contracting space. So I couldn't agree with you more, Sheena, and I'm excited for the opportunities to come.
Yes, your comments have given us much to think about, and the world of digitization is going to unlock great opportunity for healthcare workflows and additional pathways that ultimately will lead to improving healthcare outcomes. So, MJ, thank you so much for joining us today. To our audience, we hope you really enjoyed this episode, and until next time, be well.
Thank you for having me, Sheena.